Okay. We are in the middle of chapter 11, Perek Yud Aleph of Hayichud V'Amunah. And the essence of this chapter is to describe that not only, as we said in the previous chapter, that Hashem and all the things that he brings about into the world are one, the spheres and so on, that this extends down to the statements that Hashem made in the creative process. We remember from the beginning of Torah, God said, let there be, all of the different statements, 10 in total, as Pirkei Avos tells us. And although this is already an expression that is external, just like when we speak, we share something that is outside of ourselves, in contrast to what we think, although we may have an inkling about what somebody is thinking. We can't truly know their thoughts. Their spoken word is revelatory, and therefore there might be the presumption that the revelatory characteristic is somehow suggestive that there is some detachment and separation from the speaker to the listener. And that is true in the human sense, that our words, once spoken, are out of our control. That is, we cannot undo the words, and they can be taken by other people. I mean, at the lowest level, they can be plagiarized. At even a more profound level, they can be repeated. And sometimes we even forget who the original author is of those quotes. Yet with Hashem, the same vulnerability is there, because a person could ignore that Hashem is the creator. And yet, this is what the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing in this chapter, that they become an opportunity for us to grasp onto the infinity of Hashem via the defined words of the 10 statements of creation. Now, at the end of the piece that we did last week, we introduced a term, we've probably seen it before, but it's called the hidden world, Alma Disgasya, and the revealed world, Alma Disgalia. The difference between what is more immediately evident, the world, and thus we would say that that's what's revealed, so to speak, and Hashem is hidden. So Alma Disgasya, a world where godliness is hidden, or is Hashem more obvious? That's Alma Disgalia. So when we think about in our life experiences, what we notice about certain circumstances, the oft-quoted analogy of the wagon driver, the passenger, and the horse, who are all engaged in the same journey, but what is in the fore of their mind is different. The wagon driver is earning his living, the horse is getting his oats, and the passenger is reaching his destination. So what is revealed, what is obvious to them, and what is hidden? So the arbiter of the distinction in our circumstance is the age-old answer to every question, which is our degree of bittul. Do I begin with awareness of myself and then use that as a looking glass into the awareness of Hashem? Or do I begin with the awareness of Hashem? Do I start off and say, what do I need? And now once I've had my needs met, some Maslow hierarchy of needs, then I'll find the time for Hashem? Or do I say, what is it that Hashem needs? And now I do the work backwards to determine what is it that my role is in this existence. So when we talk about this in the various forms of communication, including internal communication, and again, Torah permits us to use human terminology. And we know that the Alter Rebbe, it's not only Alter Rebbe, it's in Chumash, but the Alter Rebbe really leans heavily on this in the pursuit of the understanding of Hashem. And I put this in parentheses. This is another one of those issues that some people were not so down with. I mean, they really were, let's say, cautious about this, even critical about this. The idea that you make Hashem so immanent and so personal and so relatable, they feared that you were going to lose or somehow diminish the reverence for Hashem. Again, just to take one more sentence about this, because I think it helps us to really understand the chiddush of Chassidus, the innovative point that Chassidus brought to the world. Just recently, these things get passed around. There was some rabbinic figure, I don't know who he is, I'm assuming he's a Torah scholar and a God-fearing man, he's not bad, and he was criticizing this term, Hashem is here, Hashem is there. How can you say Hashem is here, Hashem is there? Hashem is in holy places. This is a common perception This is the way that much of the Torah, I'm talking about Torah people, perceive their relationship with Hashem, that Hashem is absolutely unknowable under any degree, to any threshold. And the Alter Rebbe's message of Chassidus is that it's the endless pursuit of the unattainable. And yet, just like we can never really know another person, but we can start to get to know things about Hashem. And that awareness of things about Hashem give us an opportunity to be connected with him. And yes, it runs the risk that we could potentially become too casual. We could potentially become too casual. So Hashem reveals himself in these manners. So even using human terminology, this is what got me off on that point, to help us understand Hashem, all the while recognizing, like a little bit with a wink, wink, that we're not truly understanding the infinity of Hashem. So the oisius hamachshava, when we have organized thoughts, I mean, we have a certain sense of something, but we need to organize it in our own mind, is a certain form of, we use this word revelation, but it's revelation to myself. I don't even know what I'm thinking until I really sit down and think it through. And anyone who's ever done that thing where you do sort of the air drawing of numbers to help you figure out a simple math problem recognizes that even though I have an intuitive sense of an idea, I haven't yet concretized it. These are more what we call the hidden world, because it's hidden within me. Even though it's already a degree of awareness, it's already a degree of specificity, it's already no longer what we'll call infinite, but it's still so internal and so personalized. And then the oisius hadibor, the spoken word, which the whole objective of speaking is for the other person, meaning we don't need to talk to ourselves. The whole purpose of speech is to communicate to others. It is the characteristic of it, is to be interpersonal. So Hashem says, Vayomer Hashem creates worlds. So here we get the classic almost irony. From our perspective, this is the most fantastic thing, that God creates the world. From God's perspective, it's the most external thing. It's God expressing himself. Okay, it's almost as if, you'll pardon my sort of harsh humor to it, like, okay, how can I communicate to these idiots what I mean to say? Meaning I have to go, Hashem is saying, I have to go and reformulate it in my mind until I can express it down to them. And they're amazed. They think this is the most wonderful thing they ever heard. This is the most simplistic. To use somewhat of an analogy, we know that the Rebbe has a sort of position that we should not have elaborate mezuzah covers. Why? Because a person is spending $200 on the mezuzah cover and $20 on the scroll, because we get things mixed up. Oh, look what beautiful mezuzah cover! Look at that. But what's inside it? And again, this is very much our celebrity culture, where we're very drawn. Not us, we're perfect, but we're very drawn to the shallow and the dazzling. And we're not that interested in what we call the teichen, the content of what's going on. So this is very much, so to speak, Hashem's experience. Again, we're using human terms here. That Hashem is creating the world, which for Hashem is something very crass and very distant from the very essence, although it has this high fidelity to the very essence of Hashem. And from the perspective of creation, we're all bedazzled by it. So Hashem uses those words, taking the risk that we will think, well, that's what Hashem is the creator of the world. Again, no different than we've talked about the first grader who thinks my teacher knows the Aleph Beis, or the child who thinks my mother can make tuna sandwiches, and this is the entirety of their identity. But again, there is another nuance that we are really hanging our hat on here, which is that spoken words, unlike a third degree of expression, which is physical action, does always retain a certain characteristic and quality of the speaker. So that when the person says it, it's the way they say it. Again, the oft-quoted analogy of the man who receives a letter, but he's illiterate, so he has someone else read it to him. And when the reader reads something devastating about the listener passes out, whereas the reader just keeps reading. Why? Because it's not that meaningful to the reader. To him, it's just a perfunctory instruction manual. to the listener, it's really something profound and meaningful. So the wisp of Hashem's identity, of his infinity, is retained within the expression of speech, not as intensely as thought, but not as detached as action. So that quality fits together. And again, the terminology that we left off with last week, which is worth reviewing for a few moments, is the idea of the two stages of awareness. Remember, the word for worlds, olam, is about concealment. How aware are we of what is being concealed? There's alma discassia, where it's very concealed, like thought. I mean, you see somebody's thinking something. We've all, I'm sure, had this experience. You could tell that somebody's thinking something, but you're not sure what it is, and they're not sharing. And then there's alma disgalia, where they say it. And what they are is what they say, or what they say is expressive of who they are. So alma disgalia is what we get. And since it's speech and not action, so it retains that residue of the speaker, of Hashem, it becomes our entry point into that infinity of Hashem. Even though it results in something so tangible as heaven and earth and the trees, etc., all the 6 days of creation, we should not think, well, that's something separate. And again, I maybe I'm overemphasized it, but I think it's really crucial. This is truly the distinct point of Hasidus. Remember, we've talked about, is creation some sort of temporary thing that would be better off without? And, once we use this up, we will no longer need the physical, that it is innately some sort of barrier between me and Hashem that we would be better off without. And we just are sort of treading water to get past all of this gashmias so that we can get to what's really important, which means that we resent all of this gashmias. We look at eating and sleeping and working as nuisances that we'd really be better off without. Or do we say that the physical world is really where Hashem's purpose is effectuated? And where Hasidus comes down on this. Now, this is, again, not just a conceptual idea. Try to illustrate how this manifests itself in our strategy. Now, again, nobody is suggesting one instead of the other, but there is a little bit of tension between the primacy of Torah study and mitzvah action. And we found it here within Tanya as well. And we know this, sort of in our own lives. What should you do? Learn Torah all day. What should you do? Make sure every Jew knows. They're both true. There's a little bit of a tug of war on this characteristic. So herein lies the rub. Do we say that really we'd like to get out of this world, go put ourselves in the Beis Medrash, and study Torah that has nothing to do with the quote-unquote practical, like the Alter Rebbe writes in the 5th chapter of the Sefer Shal Beinanim, because when you study, you effectuate a union that is incomparable to any other union. We would come down strong on that. Or do we say that the absolute infinity of Hashem is effectuated when we can shake the lulav, eat the matzah, light the candles, and in that moment, we have brought about the absolute infinity of Hashem. Now, if I'm sitting and studying even the books of Nach, and I'm talking about King David and the way in which he's dealing with the battles and so forth, it doesn't always announce itself as holy. There's plenty of things in the Chumash that don't announce themselves as being immediately, evidently sanctified. And yet, we would say that we are aligned with the infinity of Hashem. And in the mitzvah actions, it doesn't always have this great thunder and lightning every time I'm doing a physical mitzvah. Well, when we take this perspective, which is really the emphasis here in Shayichud Amunah, that we see that there is no separation between the physical and the spiritual, that there's no detachment, that, okay, well, here's a bunch of stuff to keep you busy so that you don't destroy the world. But rather we see that in this Alma Discassia, this world that is hidden, we can reveal the godliness. Well, now we have truly illustrated the absolute infinity of Hashem that he is so infinite that he can exist within the finite, as we have talked about so many other times. Okay, so now let's return to where we are in the actual page. So I don't know how to identify specifically. We sort of left off in the middle of a sentence. It's about halfway down, and the Hebrew reads, Veheim shnei mini oilamos. These are two types of worlds. So I hope somebody or everybody can find it in whichever version you have, whether it's the original Hebrew, the Hebrew English, the lessons in Tanya, the Rabbi Miller Tanya, whichever one it is that you can find. The Haim, so we're saying, Haim Shnei Mini Oilimus. These are the two worlds. Alma Sistimin, a world where it is hidden, like again, the thought behind it. Because again, when we speak words, I mean, again, let's use an analogy. Maybe we've all experienced this. I'm not always perfectly familiar with the English understanding or the full understanding of every word of the davening. Even if I can translate the words through Google, I may not understand the intensity. But I know that when I read the words, it effectuates something in a spiritual sense. We read the words of Tehillim, and somehow it changes the world. I don't know. So what's happened? It's Alman System, and it's hidden. Somehow I'm tapping into it. We do this all the time. Think about technology. I don't know how technology works. I only know how to work technology. If I click here and I touch and I type this, whatever it is, I somehow get this consequence, even though I don't have any understanding of what is in fact going on. But it doesn't change that I effectuated it in that manner. So when someone says, well, I don't want to do anything unless I understand it. I don't want to shake the lulav unless I understand it. So there's a value in the pursuit of understanding, but can we ever truly understand it? The answer is ultimately no, because it is the infinite will of Hashem. So yes, we can understand how to shake the lulav and esrog, and what is the lulav, and what is an esrog, and what are the willows, and 2 and 3 and 1, etc., and right, left, and straight, and up and down. But as we pursue and pursue, just like it is with another person, we can only come to a certain point. It just is. So what we start off with works us backwards. Deloyas Galian. So this is the hidden world that's not revealed. We don't see what the godliness is. We don't recognize it. So this is expressed just like a person's thought is expressed through their spoken word. So when we talk about having kavanah, having intent, what we mean is that we not only understand the words, which is, step one, yes. So we should know what the words mean and make our effort. It's that we should attempt to get beyond just the words. Va'alma disgalyin, what is the revealing world? Nivru v'chaim hisgal sheneskalu keichsam shachas hanalamas hanakras b'shem oisis hamachshava kshem bebechinas eskalus lachius alma disgalyin nikras b'shem maimoris v'dvar Hashem b'ruach piv. So what happens in the revealed world? It now reveals what he was thinking. So we sense that somebody is thinking something. And we've all, I could only imagine, had this experience where the person who's speaking thinks they're being so coy, and they think they're being, so like, I don't know what the word is, where like the interrogator is going to get you, Perry Mason, ha, I got you, and that the witness is going to crumple and admit to, I don't know, killing Kennedy, whatever it is. But most people are not that skilled at it. It's pretty obvious. You see right through their attempt at duplicity. But some people are really good at it. Usually those are people to be afraid of. But at a higher level, like they say that there's 3 types of secret keepers. Those who can't keep a secret, those who no matter how much you pester them, they won't reveal the secret, and those who are so good that you don't even know that they have a secret. The perception, just to share, an insight, the perception, at least, of the Rebbe's immediate secretariat is that these guys are like the dumbest guys in the world. They spend all this time with the Rebbe, and every time you ask them, they say they don't know anything. They don't know anything. They don't know what the Rebbe does. They don't know what the Rebbe studies. They don't know when the Rebbe davens. You think these guys are a bunch of dummies. I mean, how could you be so oblivious? Well, they were such good secret keepers, you didn't even know they had secrets. So they just were perceived as a bunch of inattentive people. So when the Alma de Escasia, the hidden world of personal thought, is expressed through the Alma de Esgalia, the revealed world, when you have this type of expression from the creator in this case, where it is a genuine high fidelity expression, because sometimes we get so frustrated we can't express our thoughts. We're not so poetic, we're not so articulate, so our thoughts come out clumsily and we get misunderstood. When the person has got that perfect process that they truly express what they've been feeling, and again, hopefully everybody has had that experience. We probably all had the alternate experience when we get frustrated that we're not able to express ourselves. But hopefully we've also had times when we felt something very strongly, we've been able to put it into words so that when we express it to the other, they hear it, they feel it, and they become unified with us in that same expression. These are the statements of creation. So again, it's almost like an irony. On the one hand, the actual creation is almost an afterthought. It's that whole process that's really significant. On the other hand, the fact that it can go from the essential desire, which is inarticulated, to the articulation within self, the thought letters, that is, like I organize it within my own thoughts, to the expression, to the actual creation. And yes, that's exactly it. This is the greatest fidelity, so that we on this side of it have the opportunity to take what we can see, touch, and feel, that is creation, work backwards through the spoken word, back to the organized thoughts, back all the way to the very essence of the person's identity. Then we can truly be unified with the infinity of Hashem, rather than seeing creation and all of these dictates as some sort of busy work that Hashem is giving us because we annoy him and because we're somehow incapable. So here's a bunch of stuff, and sort of, this is what you can deal with. Here's a comic book, go sit in the corner and sort of, don't bother me, which is a way that creation is often perceived. I mean, I'm of course exaggerating it in a format of being almost silly, but it's seen as, well, this isn't really what life is about. Really, it's somewhere else. And I'm talking about in the world of Torah. Really, we should be somewhere else. But Nebuch, we're stuck here. So while we're here, we might as well do something good. But we're just sort of treading water here to get somewhere else. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe continues, and here really is the line, that these creation statements, let there be light, let there be the firmament, whatever it is, they reveal to the listener what is hidden and blocked or concealed within his heart. When a person expresses themselves appropriately, properly, with high fidelity, that's what the word I'm looking for, they truly express what is deep within them. Now, there is an inflection of self imposed on every aspect of our description, and so on. Now, there's an important point here that's worth mentioning, as we'll see. I mean, not just worth mentioning. I mean, the Alter Rebbe is going to bring it up, because there's one thing that's not created through speech. I mean, God says, let there be light. God says, let there be the firmament. God says, let there be the grasses and vegetables and animals and fish. The one thing that's not created from speech is humanity. They are created from the two other forms of expression. God forms the body of man from the dust of earth, and then God blows the breath of life into his nostrils. So, meaning, why doesn't God consistently, we would anticipate, would say, "But Yehi Adam, let there be humans. Vayehi Adam," and then there were humans. So here's the Alter Rebbe sort of picking up on where the pattern is broken, and much like in any, I guess we would call it sort of scientific analysis, you look for where the anomaly is, and that becomes the insight into the pattern. Meaning, if everything follows the pattern, so then that pattern is a pattern. There doesn't seem to be anything radical about it. But when the pattern is broken, this becomes a clue for the analyst that there's something else going on here besides just this pattern. Now, again, we're sort of with that constant disclaimer. We're using human terminology, and that's okay. Hashem has infinite because he's Hashem, but Hashem has three ways of expressing himself. Again, we're using human terminology and we're projecting it on Hashem. You could think it, you could say it, or you could do it. So the fact that Hashem chooses speech becomes that much more significantly an opportunity for insight when he breaks the pattern by physically making man from dust and blowing the breath of life. Meaning, had God just said, Yehi Adam, let there be man, we might have said, oh, well, the only way for God to create, again, within the parameters that it's Hashem, he can do whatever he wants, is through speech. The fact that Hashem makes physically and blows breath of life suggests, well, why didn't he do that with animals? Why didn't he make the animals out of that? Why didn't he make the stars out of that? Now the question becomes a question. Only at the end does it become a question when the pattern has been broken. So here the Alter Rebbe says, Alva be'emes, in truth, and again, whenever the Alter Rebbe says in truth, it doesn't mean, well, until now I've been lying to you. He means as we dig deeper, the deeper that we dig down is, something becomes more significant when there's somewhat of contradiction, it's sort of a thesis, antithesis, synthesis kind of process. The spoken words that come from Hashem, is something far more, again, the word is loftier, but what we mean by loftier is more personal. It's more expressive of Hashem and his essence than Chachma and all the processes of Seichel are within the person. Meaning, and again, as we've all had the experience, people think that they're so clever that no one can read what they're thinking. But it's not true, unless the guy's really a sociopath. I mean, that's the scarier part, sincerely. When we just had it in the parasha with Lavan. I mean, one of the reasons why Lavan is held out as being like the worst guy is because he always presents himself as being so honest that Yaakov keeps trusting him. Because there's no indication, we have the benefit of hindsight saying, why are you trusting him? Don't trust him, he's a liar. But that's the really scary guy. Or on the upside, again, as we talked about, the proper secret keeper, where he doesn't even give you any indication that he's got the secret, as we talked about. So Chachma is generally what we keep within ourselves. Sometimes we're not even aware of what we're thinking. That's that sort of talk therapy that we're all at least vaguely familiar with, where the therapist hears the little indicators that the speaker doesn't even notice that they are revealing through their seemingly random choice of words. Yet they are indicative of that which is far more, again, personal. The term here is higher or loftier. I'm using the word more personal. So Hashem's spoken word is more expressive of his very essence. And again, that's the theme of this whole chapter. Why? Nivra Adam bal chachma seichel. O afilu behevel elya in levad. Now, Hashem does something distinctive in the creation of human beings, as we pointed out before. We're going along through the 6 days, and again, try to put yourself in the mindset that we don't know. We don't know that human beings are going to be the last thing of creation. It doesn't tell us that Hashem set out on a 7-day plan. Maybe it's going to be 8 days. Maybe there'll be something greater created. So Hashem first makes a declaration, let us make man. Now, the let us make man is the beginning of the creation of human beings. It's the only creation that's introduced with this sort of insight that the narrator of Torah is giving to us, the readers of Torah. It doesn't say, let us make animals, let us make the firmament, let us make creation, and so on. There's this sort of pre-declaration that Hashem is telling to us, again, the readers of Torah, that he is consorting with the angels who were created on this third day of creation and saying, let us make man. Now, that's a statement from Hashem that already is the plan. Although man is actually created, as we talked about, and this is where we're going to get to this nuance, through the physical action of assembly of the body from the dust of earth, combined with the life-giving breath, neshama. The word neshama means breath. That's what the word literally means. Nishima is to breathe, of blowing the breath of life. But it's predicated on, and in a certain sense, it's already created with the statement. I mean, God says, let us make it. It's already there. Now, that is a statement from Hashem that winds up creating human beings, including the distinctive characteristic of human beings, which is the capacity for thought, not just the capacity for learning, because, of course, even an animal can be, you'll forgive the analogy, trained. You can train the animal. So that's a form of learning, but it's the human being who can imagine something outside of himself. That is the most infinite characteristic we have. And even that is created through the statement of Hashem. So again, just into the theme of this whole chapter is that Hashem's statements are absolutely expressive of who he is. Even when it manifests itself in something as physical and tangible as earth, as the ground itself. It is absolutely aligned with the infinity of Hashem, and therefore we can discover the infinity of Hashem through the discovery of the physical earth. And here we're talking about is not only, I mean, again, now we're sort of flipping the script. We say, okay, well, it's the speech of Hashem. It's not really that important. So it manifests itself in that other stuff that's not really that important. But as we know from Torah, and we would say that Hasidus emphasizes it, that there's nothing that's not important. Because if Hashem created it, that means it's absolutely integral. It's absolutely necessary for the vast plan. So now we're sort of going to the other side, that even this expressive characteristic of speech, and again, there's that disclaimer, aval be'emes, that's how the sentence begins, but, which is a little bit of a jettison, a little bit of a detachment from the previous style, to say that the creation of human beings also comes from speech, even the aspect of human being that is so infinite, that which we hold to be so exalted. I don't know what the word is. Again, closest to infinite, our ability for imagination. Like a child learns to read, that's it. The whole world is open to them. Because once you can read, you have access to infinite adventure, an infinite concept. Even that is created by the speech of Hashem. Even that which we consider to be at such a level. And this is what we know, that even Hashem's spoken word, like we say, v'yipach bi'apav nishmas chayim. V'im kain, if so, if you're in the old Hebrew, we're on the top of page Pei Tes, hadibur v'hevel ha'elyon, hu makar ha'chachma v'aseichel sheba neshama. The speech of Hashem, just the mere breath of his words, that which we would otherwise consider to be somewhat disposable, is the best I could say, is also an expression from Hashem, also an expression from the infinity of Hashem, and that manifests in that which we hold to the highest esteem, which is the capacity for imagination. So now let's go back. Hashem says, let us, including the spiritual beings, what we call the angels, make man. So again, this is the idea that human beings who are distinctive from every other creation in their capacity to engage their intellect, to have, again, I'm using the word imagination, to infinite reach, to infinite capacity, is the product of Hashem's spoken word. So not only does the spoken word create, again, the very, I don't know what the word is, sort of like physical, tangible, pardon me, not that interesting ground, because, well, Hashem doesn't really care about speech. It's so lowly. But here we're flipping it on its head, and we're saying it the opposite. Why? Because we have established that even within human speech, it is revelatory of intellect thought, letters of thought, the capacity to organize an idea, which is the product of the innate characteristic, which is the product of who we truly are. We talked about this last week. The Frierdiker Rebbe explains that in the Haggadah, when we have this, the four sons, and we introduce each one with this sort of sing-song of question-answer. The wise son, what does he say? The wicked son, what does he say? We don't just say the wise son says, the wicked son says, and so on. The Frierdiker Rebbe uses this as an opportunity to teach the lesson that how do you know who's the wise son? From what he says. Look closely at his words. And this will reveal who the very essence character of the person. It's true with Hashem as well. This is what we're saying, that even though Hashem creates with speech, which seemingly is very limited and pedestrian, it still is. Just a quick story. It's mildly humorous, and it's even true. A friend of mine was in the theater in college, and they have some rehearsal, and there was another student there who was not American, which is relevant to the story. And he came late and he clearly had not prepared. So they wanted him to sing the song. So I know that everybody here only spends their lives engaged in the holy and pure. So you may not know this song, but there's a song. And he clearly had not prepared because he read, you say tomato, I say tomato, because he's reading it off the script. So I mean, again, if those who are not familiar, it's a sort of a sing-song about saying a tomato as an American or tomato. But again, so if it's only this sort of arm's distance read, that's like what we would call action. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's the sort of assembly line deficiency. What does he do? He turns ratchets all day. He has no concept of the broader, there's no investiture of self. So what we're arguing here is, what the Alter Rebbe is presenting here is that when Hashem speaks, it isn't just some arm's distance detachment. It is the expression of his very essence. On the other hand, it's just an expression of his very essence. It's not his very essence. We've all said things that we didn't really mean, or we didn't think through, or we misspoke, and so on, or it was some sort of throwaway line, etc. So therefore, we might think, okay, so Hashem's speech, is not that important to Hashem. It's just words. And yet we're saying that even human beings who were created with the physical and the blowing of the breath of life, but even that is also predicated on a statement. Even though God creates human beings through action and breath of life, it is also predicated on the speech when God said, let us make man, so that these levels all become expressed. There's just a curiosity about this idea. What does Hashem mean, let us make man? I mean, who's the helper? So we say that the helper is the infinite godly divine entities, what we call the angels, malachim, the srafim, all the different stages of non-physical identifiable entities. So they become incorporated within humanity, which is why human beings are created at the end of creation, even after the angels, because they represent the ultimate purpose of creation, that the material and spiritual should come together. That's why a human being is a compound of dust, the least evidently godly, the physical behavior, and the neshama, which is the breath of life, this intense alignment of godliness. So here the Alter Rebbe explains, that this is what Hashem creates, even the first man. All the creations that came after him, all the human beings, including the greatest tzaddik. So yes, even Moshe Rabbeinu and Mordechai and King David and so on are all created only from the spoken word of Hashem. And even though they are closer to the infinity of Hashem than even the ministering angels, because again, the human being has the greater opportunity to be aligned with Hashem than an angel. Why is this? Because Hashem's spoken letters, Hein bechinas hamshachas koiches v'chayis mimidoisav yisparach hamyuchedes b'muhusay v'asmusay betachlis hayichud shu lamayla mayla ein ketz v'nadregas chachma shemin avroyim. because again, Hashem's spoken words are absolutely communicative of the very essence of his identity. They are absolutely unified with him to the most intense levels. Now we get some points, okay, at that point he doesn't matter anymore. Without end, to all the way to that level of Chachma. Now, again, within our own lives, there are probably things that we have said, I don't mean that we regret them or lies or anything like that. We made statements to people. What does it really mean? We have a dismissive hello that we say, it's polite and appropriate. When you get on the bus, you say hello to the bus driver. Okay. And if I didn't say hello to the bus driver, do I really believe that it somehow is disruptive to my very identity? I mean, again, yes, everything at some level, even these minor activities, yet we don't necessarily invest our entire being into them. Perhaps another area where, again, probably not us, but other people could relate to is, we mumble a bracha, we say the shahakol before we drink the water, we sort of say it out of habit. Yes, better than. But again, our spoken words are not always absolutely perfectly aligned. However, Hashem is completely and perfectly aligned. The Gemara tells us this about holy people, righteous people, scholarly people. Even their casual words are worthy of study. We find that the Alter Rebbe recommends the study of the Agadata, which are the non-halachic aspects of the Talmud. That these are, in a certain sense, more revelatory of the person's essence and of the essence of Torah, not the person's, of the essence of Torah and of Hashem, because they are the manifestation that is sort of the least guarded at that sense. So Hashem's every word is communicative and expressive of the very essence of his identity. There is no sort of throwaway associated with Hashem's words. So here the Alter Rebbe adds a whole nother level. The divine letters are not exactly like human letters. They're only letters relative to our capacity to appreciate. Remember the stencil, right? So it appears that way on our side of the ledger. That's how it makes itself down to us because of our need to have something tangible to hold on to. But in essence, we could say that on the first day, Hashem identified the midah of chesed that made its way all the way down into the specific of light. Again, even though chesed could also manifest as water. But so again, like the mezuzah, people get impressed. Wow, look at this beautiful silver case. Instead of seeing that as the communicator, it becomes the obfuscator, becomes the helm, the concealment of what is truly important with the actual mezuzah. I mean, you think about how we become associated or attached to the shallow. We pick up on these particular words and miss the sort of greater expression. So here's the Alter Rebbe saying, the investiture into the letters is for our comprehension. So again, the first day, what did Hashem create? He identified the midah of chesed. And from there, it made itself down into light. These are 22 mechanisms of expression. We know that a lot of times in Torah, we use the same letters to create words, which, based on usually the vowelization, they are two apparently completely disparate words that seemingly have nothing to do with anything. But a little digging will find, hey, there is a connection between them. Why? Because the theory is that each letter is an expression of the divine energy. And when you have those three divine energies lined up, almost like a chemical equation, I can't give you a good chemical analogy, but almost like a chemical equation, you're going to get things that appear different, but have a stronger similarity if we'll dig a little deeper. A classic example that Hasidus uses, the three Hebrew letters, Tes, Vez, and Ayin. One vowelization of those three letters is Teva. Teva means nature. We're all familiar with this word. Teva means nature. Another vowelization of those same three letters, tes, vase, aleph, is toiveya, which means to sink, like a ship that sinks. So on the surface, pardon the pun, what's sinking have to do with nature. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other, almost like a coincidence. However, Hasidus explains, well, what is nature? It is God sunken into the world. Just like if you look out at the lake, you don't see what's sunk to the bottom. But if you were to be able to peel that away, you would see it. See, here again, you have Teva, Toiveya. You have nature is God sunken into it. Gematria is very much the same way. We find two words, and in Chabad in particular, we're pretty cautious about sort of making up these gematrias. It's not so much our thing. But there are established, from previous generations from tzaddikim, that they have words that have the same gematria. So it's 1 degree removed. But if we'll use a little creative thinking, we find a connection between them. Look, I'm more obviously related to my brother than I am to my cousin, than I am to a second cousin. But eventually, if we went all the way back to Adam, we're all related. Well, essentially, this is what we're saying. The letters are like that stencil. When you have words that have the same letter or a step removed, they have the same gematria, or a step removed when we do the interchanging of letters through different systems. And I know sometimes it feels almost like a game and it's random and we're making it up. That's why we're real cautious about making up our own. But we have ones that have been established from great tzaddikim, and we'll take their word for it. What we are essentially saying is that even though, for example, the letter aleph and the letter taf, the first and last letters are sometimes interchangeable, beis, shin, you do that kind of system, even though on the surface they are two separate letters, and like in a Torah scroll, if you write a taf when you're supposed to write an aleph, it's not kosher. And they're as disparate as can be. This is letter one, this is letter last. But if we dig deeper, my stencil analogy, we keep going back, we realize they're really the same. So ultimately, there is no difference. It's the Haman Mordechai thing that you have to be drunk, and we're not talking about liquor. You have to get beyond just the rigid rationale to discover that Haman and Mordechai are the same. They certainly don't look the same. But if we dig deeper and deeper, it all comes from Hashem. Just like we thank Hashem for that which is pleasant, we thank Hashem for that which is unpleasant. What then do we wish each other? Revealed good. Yes, Gamzu Latova. But we want revealed good. When you ask somebody, how are things? And he says, Baruch Hashem, that bad, huh? I mean, that all you can say is, it's all for the best. We don't want just it's all for, we want to be able to see the best. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. We are perceiving it, again, I know I'm harping on my stencil analogy, on this side of the ledger. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. And we think that Aleph is absolutely locked into Aleph. But a little creativity, we know this in English too, in every language, sometimes letters take on different sounds. You have the letter G sound, you have the letter H sound, you put them together, they become the F sound. We have it in Torah all the time. All the letters have alternate pronunciations. Bet, vet, in not so much in Ashkenaz, but in other Gimel, Jimel, Dalid, Thalid, the hard hey, the soft hey, Vav with the sound, Vav without a sound, etc., etc. So the letters again are perceived as being rigid commodities, when they're actually more like musical notes. I don't know anything about music, but they're actually more like musical notes that they convey something that allows for cooperation. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. They are the midos. They are mechanisms, excuse me, for transmitting godliness. Shenim Zemi said they're very different in their packaging. So that they create oilamos. And again, remember, obfuscation. They create diminishment. They create finity, because infinity is overwhelming. They create finity. Livroya ha'olam, to create the world. B'chaf beis mini hamshachas shoynes dafka le'pakas v'lo yoser. But there's only these 22 base elements. Again, like I don't know the table of elements. I don't know. But there's a presumptive finite number. But there's infinite combination. just like letters. There's an infinite capacity to combine them. These are the 22 letters that are absolutely fixed. There's only 22 letters. There's 22, think of them as these sort of like nuggets of energy. Each one is a little different. And yet their capacity to be combined. I mean, think about this. It's hard to remember the language that you grew up with when you learned individual letters, because we learn the language and then we learn to read, right? The child speaks and then they learn to read. So it's a little bit backwards. But if you've ever engaged in the study of a language where you're learning the letters first, and then you're learning how to combine the letters and how they flow together. I mean, I have a friend, he's from Italy, and he's talked about the states. There's Kansas and Arkansas. Why not? I mean, how's he supposed to know? Kansas and Arkansas. Arkansas. How's he supposed to know? Who knows? It's probably right. Western Europeans always mock Americans because they're jealous. We say things like Julius Caesar. It's not Julius Caesar. It's Julius Caesar. Notre Dame. It's Notre Dame, and so on. So why? Because they become locked in, and the fluidity gets lost. So what we're doing, we got to step above, so that we don't just pronounce things absolutely phonetically. Again, we know this intuitively all the time. The way that we have silent letters and letters flow into each other. It's true in English, it's true in Hebrew, in Lashon Kodesh. Why? Because the letters are not like rocks. They're not so rigid. They have a cooperation, but in order to cooperate, you have to sort of reach above. You have to discover somewhat of the infinity that is contained within them. So Hashem gives us, like I'm calling it, the rocks, the statements, and we have the opportunity to do a little exploration of the infinity contained within them. And their shape, the way that they are written, and we're talking about not just the way we write in our handwriting, but the way it's written in the Torah. It also becomes an indicator as to what it is expressing. As we mentioned, today is the liberation of the Mittler Rebbe, the story about his father who hired a teacher for him, and he told him, I want you to teach him Aleph. What is Aleph? It's a point above, a point below, and above that connects them. So again, it's the idea of the physical shape and the names, Aleph, Beis, and when we spell them out phonetically, and the gematrias and so on, and all of this. And again, there's a whole world of Yiddishkeit says, no, you're making that up, or we don't know what that is. And then they're making up their own, and the name of the street, and so on. I mean, we've all heard these speeches at weddings, and I'm not against it, but we got to be real cautious with it. It's not really a Chabad thing to create our own gematrias. We're really very hesitant about it. That even when a human being expresses himself, again, is an expression of his very identity, even though he just said these rigid words. And again, we take people overly literally sometimes. We misunderstand. I mean, I use this as a simple, almost comical analogy. The guy gets married. He buys his wife flowers. She says, oh, you shouldn't have. 25 years later, she says, how come you never buy me flowers anymore? He says, what do you mean? I bought you flowers. You told me I shouldn't have, so I didn't. Meaning, that's the words. Those are the letters. But there's something deeper going on there. So again, Hashem gives us the statements of creation. We may perceive them as being rather quotidian. I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds fancy. It means rather ordinary. But it becomes the opportunity for us to look into something deeper. Now, again, I'm just telling you out there are people that they get very nervous about that. They say, well, first I got to master all of what the literal meaning is. I mean, there's some virtue to that. I mean, we're not against that. And then I can, dabble in something beyond it. But this is what the Alter Rebbe saw as being the crisis of his time, that people are so fixated on the rigidity that they're missing anything beyond it. And therefore, he's willing to share it with us at the risk of us saying the person might make the mistake. So it doesn't really matter what I say. It only matters what I mean. And you can see how that can become a problem as well. All right.